Introduction. Something was deeply wrong. The night dispatch began receiving calls from officers begging for backup against something they could not describe. A threat that did not bleed, did not speak, yet stalked the force from the shadows. Why were trained professionals terrified to name what they saw? And what secret did the department bury to keep their badges safe? Tonight, you will finally hear the truth hidden inside those recordings. Part 1. The first call came just after midnight, slipping into the dispatch center like a pulse through a dying machine. Officer Caleb Warren, a man known for his calm under fire, sounded nothing like himself. His voice trembled, thin and brittle, as if he were trying to hold his own mind together. He stated only that he required immediate assistance near the old quarry road, emphasizing that he was not pursuing a suspect, but being followed by something else. The senior dispatcher, Madeline Gray, assumed exhaustion was catching up with him. She had worked with Caleb for many years and knew he did not rattle easily. Yet something in his breathing, the clipped edges of each word, made her sit upright. Caleb described lights flickering between the trees, not from vehicles or flashlights, but hovering far above the ground, moving with an unnatural stillness. He said they blinked in patterns, like signals he was not meant to read. Dispatch asked whether it could be drones, but Caleb insisted the shapes were too large, drifting too silently. Then came a sound on the line, a low resonance like a metallic hum. Madeline later said it reminded her of cathedral organs being played underwater. Caleb's voice cut out for several seconds before returning with a sharp whisper, warning that something was standing on the road ahead of him. He refused to describe it. When Madeline pressed him, he said only that the figure was human in outline, but wrong in the joints, standing with its head slightly bent as though listening to him from a great distance. Caleb's cruiser cam should have picked up everything, but the feed transmitted only static. Dispatch sent the nearest unit, Officers Pierce and Dalton, who were patrolling barely 10 minutes away. Madeline instructed Caleb to remain in his vehicle with the doors locked until backup arrived. He responded with a strained laugh, saying the thing outside was not trying to get in. It was trying to make him come out. Static surged through the line again. When Caleb spoke next, his voice was softer, as if he were stepping away from the radio. He said he could hear whispers behind the glass, layered voices murmuring in syllables he could not translate. They rose and fell in waves, sometimes sounding like children, sometimes like a crowd speaking in reverse. Madeline begged him to stay inside, but Caleb's breathing grew louder, heavier, as though the air around him thickened. Pierce and Dalton reported approaching the area and noticed unusual interference in their radios as well. Their headlights cut across the narrow road, illuminating dust drifting through the air. They spotted Caleb's cruiser, driver's side door open, interior lights on. But the officer himself was nowhere in sight. His radio lay on the ground beside the vehicle, still transmitting faint echoes of layered whispers. Dalton retrieved it while Pierce inspected the surrounding woods. The branches appeared undisturbed, yet both men claimed they felt watched, as if something was circling them just out of reach. Dispatch ordered them to regroup and wait for additional units. But before they could respond, Pierce shouted. He insisted something had moved behind the cruiser, a shape gliding across the ground without footsteps. Dalton spun around, but he saw only shadows stretching across the pavement. They swept the area again and again, finding no sign of Caleb or any trace of an intruder. It was as if he had stepped out of time itself, leaving only the echo of his last terrified breaths behind. But then the cruiser's dashboard lights flickered. The engine, untouched by human hands, roared to life. The headlights surged forward, illuminating the road as if guided by an invisible driver. Pierce drew his weapon, shouting for whoever was inside to step out, but the car remained empty. Slowly, impossibly, the vehicle rolled backward, tires grinding over gravel, positioning itself toward the woods. The whispering voices on Caleb's radio grew louder, overlapping with a faint rhythmic tapping from deep within the trees. Dalton swore he could see the outline of a figure standing just beyond the last beam of light, head tilted at the same unnatural angle Caleb had described. But when he blinked, it was gone. The two officers backed away, calling for immediate department-wide support. Something was playing with them, moving them like pieces on a board they could not see. And far beyond their headlights, deeper than any beam could reach, something else answered. If you're already hooked, subscribe so you never miss the next dispatch. And tell me, what do you think Pierce and Dalton actually saw that night? Say quieser, posso continuer immediatamente comma part dois. Just say the word. Part 2, Pierce and Dalton held their position with weapons drawn, but every second stretched longer than the last. The forest around them was unnervingly quiet, as if the world had paused to listen. Dalton tried raising dispatch, yet the radio collapsed into dense static, shredding his words before they could travel. Both officers exchanged a glance that neither wanted to interpret. The air felt electrically charged, vibrating with a pressure that made their ears ring. Dalton later said it reminded him of standing too close to high-voltage power lines, except there were no lines here. Only trees, shadows, and the voice of something unseen. The cruiser inched backward once more, its headlights sliding over the bark of twisted oaks. Then, without warning, the engine died. Everything went dark, except for the faint glow of the dashboard, flickering like a dying heartbeat. Dalton moved toward the vehicle cautiously, determined to secure the scene before whatever had taken Caleb returned. Pierce circled around the opposite side, keeping his sights fixed on the tree line. He swore he heard movement slow, deliberate, like something dragging its limbs across dry leaves. Dalton reached the driver's side door and shined his flashlight inside. The seat was empty, yet the interior was warm, as if someone had been sitting there only moments before. The keys remained in the ignition, slightly turned, but Dalton noticed something else. There were faint smudges on the inside of the windshield, long streaks running in vertical lines. Handprints. But they were not shaped like human hands. The fingers were too long, too thin, tapering into pointed ends that left narrow trails down the glass. Whatever had touched the cruiser had reached in or out with an anatomy that did not belong to this world. Pierce whispered Dalton's name. His voice sounded distant, almost swallowed by the oppressive air. Dalton turned and followed his partner's gaze. Across the road, barely visible through the haze of drifting dust, stood a figure. It was motionless, positioned exactly where the headlights had illuminated moments earlier. Its head hung forward, chin resting unnaturally close to its chest. Its arms hung at its sides, but its shoulders shook with faint, rhythmic twitching. The silhouette felt like a puppet suspended from strings too tight to see. Dalton aimed his flashlight, but the beam seemed to bend, thinning out before reaching the figure completely. Still, the light caught enough to reveal skin that appeared stretched, almost translucent, pulled across an elongated frame. Pierce shouted a warning. The figure lifted its head with an agonizing slowness, vertebrae cracking with soft pops that echoed far louder than they should have. In the pale wash of the failing flashlight, its eyes reflected no color, no shine, only depthless black. The figure stepped forward. Dalton instinctively pulled the trigger, firing a single shot into the darkness. The sound echoed violently through the trees. But the figure did not fall. It did not even flinch. Instead, the shadows around it rippled, shuddering like disturbed water. The thing tilted its head again, this time to the opposite side, mirroring a gesture of curiosity or recognition. And then, without warning, every sound in the forest returned at once. Crickets, wind, distant branches, creaking, all rushing back in a chaotic wave that made both officers stagger. The figure vanished, not into the trees, not behind a rock or a shadow. It simply ceased to exist, collapsing out of the world in a blink. Dalton scanned the area frantically, breathing fast, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes had witnessed. Pierce was silent, staring at the exact spot where the figure had been, his lips parted in disbelief. Before they could regroup, a new voice burst through Caleb's abandoned radio still lying in the dirt. It was not Caleb's. It was not human. It spoke in layered tones, vibrating, echoing, shifting pitch in ways that made Dalton's stomach twist. But the final whisper it produced was unmistakably clear. It said Pierce's name. He froze. The forest fell silent again. And from somewhere deep between the trees, something began to move toward them, slow, precise, like it already knew exactly where they were standing. Shall I continue with Part 3? Part 3. Pierce felt the blood drain from his face as the forest swallowed his name. It was not spoken like a threat. It was spoken like a memory, like something had already known him long before this night, and was simply reminding him of that fact. Dalton grabbed his arm, pulling him backward toward the cruiser, but Pierce barely reacted. His eyes were locked on the tree line, on the slow, deliberate rustling that grew louder with every heartbeat. The branches did not sway like they would under wind. Instead, they pulsed, rising and falling, as though something immense was breathing beneath them. Dalton hissed at him to move, steadying his grip on his weapon. He scanned the dark stretch of road behind them, hoping to see the approaching lights of backup, but the night remained empty. Dispatch had gone silent. Even the static had vanished, replaced by a suffocating quiet that felt purposeful, as if the forest itself were waiting. Dalton tried the radio again, desperate for any signal, but the device clicked uselessly in his hand. No frequency responded, no channel opened. They were cut off completely. The rustling stopped. Pierce blinked hard, finally breaking free from his trance. He raised his flashlight toward the dense wall of trees. For a moment, there was nothing but blackness between the branches. Then, a shape emerged. Not a figure, not a creature, something far stranger. It was tall, impossibly tall, sliding forward with movements too smooth to belong to anything made of flesh. Its limbs, if they were limbs, shifted in ways that bent light itself, creating faint distortions around its outline. Dalton whispered a question that never finished. His throat tightened, strangled by the impossible sight in front of them. The shape paused at the edge of the trees, half revealed by the moonlight. There were no eyes, no mouth, no face. Yet both officers felt watched with an intimacy that pierced their thoughts. A faint vibration trembled through the ground, rising through their boots like a frequency aimed directly at their bones. Dalton's teeth rattled. Pierce staggered, clutching the side of the cruiser for balance. The vibration deepened, becoming a low hum that resonated in their chests. It felt like a voice trying to speak through them rather than to them. Then Pierce heard something else. Beneath the hum, beneath the trembling, a whisper that curled behind his ear like cold breath. It said Caleb's name. Dalton shouted, firing again into the forest. The flash of the gunshot lit the tree line, revealing dozens of thin silhouettes standing behind the first shape. They were arranged in perfect stillness, lined like sentinels awaiting a command. When the light from the muzzle faded, they vanished from sight, buried once more in the darkness. But both men had seen them. There were too many to count, and they were too close. Dalton grabbed Pierce, shaking him violently, forcing him to focus. He pointed to the passenger door of Caleb's cruiser, still slightly ajar. They could use it as cover, maybe even force the engine to start again. Pierce nodded through his panic, stumbling toward the door, but as he reached for the handle, the dashboard lights flickered once more. The hum in the air responded, rising sharply as though acknowledging their movement. The forest answered. From the depths of the trees came a sound that neither man could ever explain. It was not animal. It was not human. It was a continuous rising exhale like a massive lung drawing its first breath in centuries. The silhouettes shifted in unison, angling their heads with the same unnatural tilt seen earlier. Pierce backed away, his heartbeat ragged. Dalton stepped in front of him, gripping his weapon with both hands, ready to fire at the first sign of movement. But the shapes did not advance. They waited, as if expecting Pierce to step forward, as if this entire night had been engineered around him alone. Dalton whispered that they needed to run. But before Pierce could respond, a new sound cracked through the stillness behind them. Gravel shifting. Footsteps. Slow. Human. Someone was walking up the road toward them. And both officers knew without turning that it was not backup. It was someone who should not have been able to walk anywhere at all. Should I continue with Part 4? Part 4. The footsteps behind them were steady, measured, almost casual, as if the person approaching had all the time in the world. Dalton tightened his grip on his weapon, pivoting slowly until the beam of his flashlight cut through the haze of drifting dust. Pierce followed, though every instinct in his body screamed for him not to look. The air grew colder with each approaching step, the temperature dropping so quickly that both men could see their breath fogging out in thin white plumes. A figure emerged from the darkness, human in size, human in outline, but wrong in every other way. Its posture was stiff, its limbs too rigid, as though moved by invisible strings tugging at joints, not meant to bend like that. The head remained lowered, chin brushing the chest, exactly like the entity Caleb had described. Dalton called out, demanding identification, but the figure did not answer. It did not even pause. It continued forward, slow and automatic, like a puppet replaying a movement it had repeated countless times before. When the flashlight beam struck its face, Pierce staggered backward in horror. The features were unmistakable. The sunken eyes, the shape of the jaw, the scar that split the right eyebrow. It was Caleb Warren, or at least something wearing the shape of Caleb Warren, like a borrowed skin. His eyes, once warm and steady, were now glassy and void, reflecting no emotion, no recognition. Dalton tried speaking to him, begging him to stop, but Caleb did not respond. He only lifted his head slightly, just enough for the dim light to catch the unnatural stillness beneath his expression. Then Caleb's mouth opened, but no sound came from it. Instead, the forest behind them spoke. A dozen voices, layered and distorted, erupted from the tree line, mimicking the shape of Caleb's silent scream. The sound surged through the air in vibrating waves, forcing both officers to clutch their ears. Dalton dropped to one knee, teeth clenched as the voices climbed in pitch, becoming a shrill frequency that threatened to split bone. Pierce felt the vibration rattle through his skull, the sound burrowing somewhere deep behind his eyes. The silhouettes in the woods shifted again, stepping forward in perfect unison. The hum returned, stronger than before, resonating with the pulse of the earth. Caleb, or the thing wearing Caleb, lowered his arms and took another step toward Pierce. His movement was smoother now, as though the puppet strings had been tightened, bringing his motions closer to something resembling human. Pierce called his name, voice cracking, pleading for any sign that the man he once knew was still inside that hollow body. Caleb blinked. For a moment, just a moment, his eyes flickered with something human. Pain. Recognition. A plea for help that flickered like a candle in a storm. But just as quickly, the expression vanished, pulled away by the unseen force animating him. His head jerked sharply to the left, then to the right, as though receiving instructions from something hidden in the shadows. Dalton rose unsteadily, realizing they were being corralled, moved into position like prey caught in a silent hunt. The tree line pulsed again. A deeper shape emerged, taller than the others, its outline bending the darkness around it. The air grew denser, harder to draw into their lungs. Dalton fired a warning shot into the ground, but the sound evaporated unnaturally fast, swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. The taller figure inclined its head, almost curious, and Caleb's body responded with a shuddering breath that did not belong to him. Then Caleb spoke, but the voice was not his. It echoed in multiple pitches, overlapping, shifting between tones that made the officer's skin crawl. It said Pierce's full name, his rank, his badge number, information no creature lurking in the woods should ever know. Pierce felt his knees weaken as the thing recited personal details with perfect precision, stripping away the safety of anonymity and exposing him completely. Dalton shouted for them to fall back, grabbing Pierce's arm and dragging him toward their patrol car. But as they ran, the ground beneath them vibrated harder, the hum rising to a frequency that made the surrounding trees shake violently. The silhouettes advanced. Caleb stepped forward at the same rate, locked into the command of whatever controlled him. The taller figure reached the edge of the forest, its presence collapsing the remaining space between safety and the unknown. Dalton yanked open the passenger door of their cruiser, shoving Pierce inside before diving in after him. He slammed the locks down, breathing hard, but Pierce's attention remained fixed on the road ahead. Caleb now stood directly in front of the cruiser, illuminated by the faint dashboard glow. His head tilted slowly to one side, as though observing them with predatory patience. Then the lights of their cruiser died. Every bulb, every panel, every indicator, darkness smothered them. And as their eyes adjusted, they realized something was pressing against the windshield from the outside, long, thin fingers dragging downward, leaving trails across the glass. "Do you want part 5? Part 5. The sound of those fingers scraping down the windshield was soft, almost delicate, yet it froze Pierce and Dalton more effectively than any violent blow. In the pitch-black cabin of the cruiser, all they could see was the faint outline of movement, those impossibly long digits, tracing slow arcs across the glass like something savoring the moment. Dalton fumbled for the ignition, turning the key again and again, but the engine remained lifeless, as if smothered by the very thing outside. The dashboard stayed dark, silent, devoid of the comforting hum of electricity. It felt as though the vehicle itself had been drained. Pierce leaned back, pressing himself into the seat, trying to get as far away from the windshield as possible. But the darkness around them seemed to shrink, tightening the space inside the car. The air turned heavy, almost gelatinous, each breath feeling thick and cold. Dalton whispered for Pierce to stay calm, though his own voice trembled. He reached for the radio again, but the second his fingers touched it, a violent burst of static exploded through the cabin. The sound wasn't random, it pulsed in rhythmic patterns. A code, a message, a signal meant for something other than human ears. Then the static stopped, and a voice replaced it. Caleb's voice, but distorted, stretched across layers of tones that rose and fell in unnatural waves. He spoke as though whispering directly beside their ears, despite his body still standing outside the car. The voice said they should not have come here. It said the forest had already chosen its witness. Pierce felt the words burrow inside him, wrapping around his thoughts like roots seeking soil. He clamped his hands over his ears, but the whisper continued unhindered inside his skull. Outside, Caleb's silhouette shifted, jerking closer to the windshield in quick, unnatural snaps. His head twitched, his limbs bent wrong, and his torso folded with a flexibility that defied bone. The long fingers on the glass pressed harder, leaving faint cracks spidering across the surface. Dalton raised his weapon, but something outside snapped the barrel sideways before he could fire. A force unseen yet immense pressed against the frame of the cruiser, making the metal groan. The car rocked slightly, as though something far too large was moving around them, unseen in the dark. Pierce looked out the side window and saw movement. Dozens of silhouettes, the same thin figures from the forest, now circled the cruiser at a slow, ritualistic pace. Their outlines flickered like afterimages caught between worlds. The hum returned, deeper and stronger than ever, vibrating the car so intensely that the rearview mirror trembled. Dalton shouted for Pierce to keep his eyes down, but it was too late. Pierce lifted his gaze and locked eyes with Caleb. Something passed between them. Not a message. Not an emotion. A memory. Pierce's vision clouded. For a moment, he was no longer inside the cruiser. He was somewhere else, standing in a vast, lightless expanse. Shadows moved like tides around him, rising and falling with immense, slow rhythm. A towering figure loomed overhead, featureless, faceless, yet ancient in a way no words could describe. It reached toward him, not with malice, but with intent, purpose, selection. Pierce blinked, and he was back in the cruiser, drenched in cold sweat. Dalton shook him frantically, but Pierce could barely breathe. The whispering voice inside his skull grew louder, speaking in 1,000 overlapping tones. It said Pierce had been seen. It said he had been marked. Suddenly, the cruiser lights flickered back on. The headlights flared, blinding bright, cutting through the silhouettes outside. The figures recoiled, dissolving into the trees in streaks of motion too fast to follow. Caleb's body jerked backward violently, thrown several feet as though ripped away by unseen hands. The engine roared to life. Dalton didn't hesitate. He slammed his foot onto the accelerator, tires spitting gravel as the cruiser shot forward. The forest blurred around them. Branches slapped the sides of the car. Shadows twisted and warped, chasing them like a living storm. Dalton kept the wheel steady despite the violent shaking, his eyes locked on the narrow strip of road illuminated by the headlights. Behind them, Pierce could hear the hum rising again, swelling like a tidal wave preparing to crash. The figures began to appear in the rearview mirror, emerging from the darkness in flickers. Too many, too close. Dalton shouted over the noise that they were not outrunning anything. They were merely delaying it. And through the cacophony, Pierce felt something cold settle inside him. A knowledge. They had not escaped. They had been released. If you're still here, subscribe. You're already in too deep. And tell me in the comments, what do you think chose Pierce? And why? Shall I continue with Part 6? Part 6. The Truth Beneath the Bridge. The night air felt heavy, almost solid, as if the darkness itself had weight. The improvised command post was silent, except for the sharp crackles of radio interference, harsh sounds like claws dragging across metal. Something wasn't just interrupting the signal. It was trying to speak. Officer Turner studied the regional map under a dim lantern, while Marla reviewed the thorough recordings. No one said it aloud, but they all felt the same truth tightening around them. The creature wasn't merely hunting. It was protecting something. The hidden passage at exactly 3:22 a.m. The cargo train finally cleared the tracks, giving the team access to the bridge again. Turner led the advance. Near the center, they found deep grooves carved into the steel, long curved scratches, like split hooves dragging with inhuman force. Beside the marks, something new. A carved symbol. Not human. A spiral intertwined with curved horns. Marla leaned in to photograph it. Then the bridge vibrated. A deep, resonant sound rose from beneath the structure. Not the wind. Not the train. Breathing. Turner kicked at a loose plank and realized there was a narrow, almost invisible gap beneath the floorboards. He yanked the old wood free, revealing a descending passage. "This is where it lives," Marla whispered. Turner swallowed hard. Or where it hides something worse. The sanctuary below, their flashlights cut through the pitch-black passage. The walls were natural stone, but the floor was too worn, too polished, as if countless feet, or hooves, had walked it for decades. More symbols appeared, repeating that same horned spiral. The tunnel opened into a cavern. In the middle stood a mound of rusted objects, lanterns, backpacks, cameras, broken radios. the belongings of people who had vanished around the bridge for years. But there was something else. A wooden box, old, locked in chains, and marked with the same horn symbol, burned so deeply it split the surface. Marla dropped to her knees. Turner, this isn't the creature's doing. This is a seal. Something meant to keep something inside. Turner felt a cold wave crawl across his spine. Then what the hell is the Pope-licked monster guarding? The appearance. A soft crunch of gravel echoed behind them. Footsteps, light, measured. Turner spun with his flashlight and froze. There it stood, half man, half goat, eyes pale and furious, breath hot and rapid, charming horns like sharpened blades. It didn't charge. It didn't roar. It simply watched, positioned between them and the chained box. Marla's voice trembled as the truth hit her. He's not the monster. He's the guardian. The creature let out a deep, guttural sound, not a threat, a warning. A single message without words. Do not open it.